Hi everyone, welcome to Key IVR's first ever podcast where we delve into the world of payments and everything in between. We're delighted to have you all here listening and watching wherever you might be. Today we have Mark Kelly with us and he is going to talk about the cost of debt collection.
Hi. Morning.
Do you want to introduce yourself just a little bit, give us an overview of your experience?
Yes, I'm Mark Kelly, I'm CCO at Key IVR. I've been here for just over 9 years. I was a customer for 4 years before and worked with Darren on a solution he built for the industry I was in. We got on very well and came over here, and here I am 9 years on, less hair, more grey.
And I can see it's your birthday today, so
yes,
happy birthday.
And apparently I am the best granddad in the world ever.
Very nice, very nice. So we always have a random question just to kick things off.
Okay.
And I am a complete and utter movie buff. So what is a great movie?
It's not going to be a challenging question.
No, not at all. What's a good movie that you've seen recently?
I see a lot of films. I think Nobody.
Nobody?
Yeah.
And what's that about? Who's it got in it?
It's got the guy from, I can never remember his name, which is really frustrating, from Better Just Call Saul.
Yes, I know which one you're on about now, yeah.
Where he plays a very quiet, subdued character who has a dark past, which comes out and well worth the watch. Very entertaining.
Very good.
Very graphic though, so if you're a bit queasy, wouldn't bother.
Well, hopefully it's one our viewers might enjoy. So the topic of today is what is the cost of manual debt collection? In the world of payments, I believe manual debt collection is a very large cost for a lot of business, especially with the amount of staff that people have to employ, the amount of time it takes. So we've just got a few questions around that.
Okay.
If you wouldn't mind answering some of them. So our first question is, what were clients doing before they came to Key IVR? So before they implemented one of these automated secure payment systems?
Look, I mean, that's a really good question because it's really that area that made Key IVR what it is. So before Key IVR, Darren, our CEO, had a company selling telephony systems and got into doing some websites. And while engaging with those early clients, which were in debt and parking charge notification collection companies, it was at the beginning of a recession. And the companies that we're working with were bursting at the seams. One of the positive negatives from a recession is that a lot of businesses struggle and a lot of businesses boom. And the boom ones are debt companies. Whenever there is a economic crisis, the debt companies flourish tenfold. And in that particular time, it was sort of early 2005-ish, 2006, 2007. Those companies were bringing more and more clients to themselves, more and more debt books themselves. But the problem they had was recruitment. They weren't able to facilitate actually chasing debt down, because it'd be lovely if debt was send somebody a letter and they pay you, or ring them once and they pay you, but that isn't the reality.
Very rarely the case.
You know, an agent could phone somebody 10 plus times just to even get hold of them. So they were ringing hundreds and hundreds of people a day to have 24 phone calls to collect 6 or 7 payments. It was very, very costly. Wages, crikey, if it was today's rates, minimum wage then was like 14,000. Nowadays, 24, 25,000, it's different again. But if you think to try and recruit somebody to ring, at most they could do was ring 100 people a day. Those 100 phone calls, they would probably only interact with 8 people. You were ringing in the daytime, people are working, people aren't available. There would be answer machines where they were leaving messages. Weirdly enough, they wouldn't get sent back. Sorry about that. I should turn my device off. Very unprofessional. So essentially, they were paying 92% of their wages to speak to nobody. And they were recruiting dozens of people a day to try and bolster. And Darren was in this environment. So really, it's thanks to him, because he was there and was watching the processes that they do. And being a tech, he went away and wrote an IVR because in his opinion, so our first IVR was actually outbound, not inbound.
So is that something that would call out to people to collect debt, and then they would just have to put their card information in? And
to an extent, initially it was a call to action.
Right.
It was how to, he looked at what was the most expensive piece, and the wastage, the 92% of time wasted was his first piece of how do I get rid of that? Well, that was simple. There were still companies out who had dialer systems, which were designed for hundreds of thousands of records.
Yeah.
But in that environment, each agent had 100 people to phone a day. They could only deal with a certain amount of calls at a time. So he wrote an outbound dialing platform for those businesses, and each agent could load up their work file, start it going. It would ring when a call came in, they'd pause it. They'd take that call, they'd deal with that person who needed to take a payment. That worked very successfully. But again, of those calls that were coming in, half of them just wanted to pay. And that was another waste of time. So he essentially wrote our next IVR, which was the inbound. So you'd ring with the outbound. If somebody wanted to pay, it would switch. I mean, nowadays it's just normal. But in those days, it wasn't around. It didn't happen.
Giving people the choice, I suppose, as well. It was
press 1 to pay or press 2 to speak to an agent. Half of the people would pay. Half of the people would speak to an agent to explain why they couldn't pay. So he got rid of like 96% of the effort. 94%, I think, was the stat. And that's where we got our first cost analysis, that using a self-service IVR was 94% cheaper, because all of that manual effort that was, never mind a waste of money, it was mundane, it was boring. Trying to recruit somebody to ring somebody knowing they're not going to answer the phone, it's not a very interesting job. There's more valuable things those people could do. So it meant they could take on as many new businesses as they wanted, because they actually only needed people to speak to 4% of the people they were trying to chase.
Absolutely.
And that's what drove that. Money, save money.
And I suppose in today's day and age, that kind of process would never uphold now. So it was it was innovative for its time as well. Yeah.
It's still very popular.
Thank you, Mark. Well, our next question is, what are the key things or KPIs organisations need to look for when assessing their methods of collecting debt?
It's a good question. Well, I mean, I'm a little bit obsessed with money on the business side. Obviously, part of my responsibility is cost saving, and so that involves looking at processes. So it's the same for any of the companies we work with. When we're talking to them, it's about understanding where their biggest spends are. Where is the biggest leak? Where is the biggest area that could be saved? So they should really understand their end-to-end effort. If I have a record, a single client that I'm going after, how many letters am I sending? How many phone calls am I making? How many visits am I making? In that world, there are companies who just validate data. They're not actually collecting the debt. They're confirming that that's a real phone number, and they get paid for, there's £1 for it's a real phone number. They knock on the door. Is that somebody that, yes, they live there, that's £1. So there's different ways of debt companies making money. For debt validation is a piece in itself. Then when you move into the actual the sort of debtor collecting, it depends what type you are. High court and bailiffs, it's a different world. They're going to the building, they're having all of that great expense. They've gone to the trouble of getting there, but then they need to be able to leave something for that person to pay, or let them set up a payment plan. So we looked at all around that technology, but they need to understand what that physical cost is. If I go and visit those people just to try and get that payment, is there something I can do first? So that's again when we're using the outbound, is what are you paying before you even get to speak to somebody? What's the actual cost of servicing that debt? Invariably, what we find is that most debt companies lose money on 80% of the debts they're trying to recover. They only make money on about 20% of their debts, sufficient to break even. I mean, it's a common misconception. People believe that debt companies are, filthy rich, they're making loads and loads of money. The reality is very different. Their margins are very small, they're very heavily governed. They don't have the ability to charge for the sake of it. They're regulated to death. So their margins are really important. And if you are wasting money sending letters, if you don't have to, sometimes you have to, but you don't have to send 8. You have to send a letter to let the people know you're chasing, but that letter costing you £1 to send, I can communicate, 10, 12, 14 text messages in that cost, giving them an ability to service that debt there and then. When I receive a letter, I've got to do something. I've got to go to your website. I've got to put something in. I've got to validate who I am. You're making it more difficult.
You've got to do it in the time that you have as well. And a lot of people, especially now, they don't have the time, I suppose.
So it's got to be 24/7, can't be office hours, needs to be automated, needs to be self-serviced. But you've got to pay for that technology. And the only way to do that is to assess what you're actually costing yourself out at today and be open with it.
Does the same thing apply for, I know we spoke a lot about debt collection companies, but just any other normal company that's operating within retaining profit and retaining their revenue? To
an extent, there's two types of payment. There's pay me now and I'll deliver you something, or pay me something that you owe me. And it's very dependent on what that is. The businesses that we work with who are in a pay me now and I'll deliver something, they want often more ways of making payment. They've got that sale to the point of, I want it. The last thing they want to do is say, okay, now, in fact, I was on the phone this morning with the company saying, well, yeah, we just drive them to the website. Well, in sales, if I've got my customer sat in front of me who's about to sign an order and I say, I'll tell you what, I'll just leave it with you.
Yeah.
I'm going to wander off to another appointment. If you feel like it, just send that in. Your drop-off ratio is ruined.
Absolutely. You're still going to lose a percentage, aren't you, at least?
Exactly. They think different. They grant some. You're buying what? You're spending what? Is that really sensible? So, the companies who are waiting to ship goods or sell goods want that deposit or that payment now. And we've made sure that there are as many mechanisms and alternatives, whether it's the agent taking the payment, the IVR taking the payment, the call to action that's been delivered to me to say, your goods are ready, do you want them? And fill it in on that device in front of me without any effort other than putting my own payment details in. They have a much higher success rate.
Yeah.
If you're chasing monies that you're owed, it's a different concept because you're trying to make sure that what you actually collect has some margin left in it. If you're chasing is expensive, if you're constantly sending letters, if you're constantly trying to phone people, that just takes all of that margin away. And I get it, a big business maybe doesn't see that. They look at them when we're making our profit at the end, but it's about the as my grandmother was saying, and watch the pennies, pounds will take care of themselves. If you're not looking at those costly, repetitive sweeps and replacing them with a cost-effective improvement, you're missing that profit chance. You could do better.
Absolutely agreed. Our next question, because I kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent there with you. Can you give an example of how a company has taken it from a costly setup to something more efficient and automated?
From a costly setup?
I'd say from a costly existing process to how Key IVR might have come in and improved things for them.
Yeah, and this is always a weird one, because while you want your processes to enhance a business and allow them to be more profitable, what we've seen quite a few times over the years is a little bit sad. We've had a number of companies in the manufacturer to the door area. We've been very successful in that area. There is getting that deposit in place, getting that balance paid, making sure everything's where it needs to be and quicker. These are companies that would have been using paper order forms and would have been submitting those order forms back to the office. The office would process those order forms, process the card payments. They're exposed to card data. Well, from that salesperson agreeing the order and signing a contract in the home to it being processed and them either taking a deposit, could be anything up to a week. A lot happens in a week, especially when you're selling at the door.
Yeah.
So being able to be sat in there with that person, agree, the windows or the doors or the garage doors or the blinds or whatever it is they're doing, and the salesperson to be able to let the customer pay a deposit, tokenize that card so that when it was shipped, the balance could be taken the same way. They could do a quality assessment over the phone and still have the card details already and just make it really, really smooth. They went from potentially leaving the house with a load of cash, which was also a big risk. We had one company banking £11 million a month in cash
Wow. Okay.
in their staff's bank accounts and transferring it to the company account, because there was no physical way to do it.
Yeah.
And the cost, banking £11 million at 70 pence 100 is not cheap. So giving them ways, they're saving money in the banking, they're getting more orders, they're getting more deposits, made it very, very successful. But at the same point, it made it very efficient. So people lost their jobs. We assumed that people would just be moved into a more useful role in different areas, but the reality was very different. Some of those companies who were doing everything by hand went from 40 people to 30 people to 20 people to 10 people. And you were going back in to visit those companies, you're not a popular person when you walk in. It was never the goal of what we were trying to achieve, but it really resonates into what you can save. Could you imagine what the cost of 30 wages are for somebody's business?
That's a lot of money. Yeah.
Even at today's minimum wage, we're only talking 2 or 3 years ago, even at 20 grand a piece, £600,000 a year for a system costing them 10. We don't charge enough.
I think today now, though, especially with AI and the automation of absolutely everything, it is a bit more understandable and a bit more easier to deal with. People are shifting their mentality into different areas of work, but it still doesn't make that transition easier.
No, it is odd. AI is for another topic, and as we know, I have many opinions. I have many opinions on that. It was never our aim to put people out of work. It was very much about supporting growth. That was always when I brought the solution myself before I came over. It was about how can I do more with the same people? How can I bring more revenue, more work with the same people? Grow without having to add staff every time you grew. That was the thought process behind automation and behind efficiencies, was around about, well, if you could be 20, 30% busier than you are today with exactly the same staff, that's a massive difference in your turnover.
Would you say that it can help businesses grow faster?
Definitely, yeah. And competitively. It's a very competitive market. If you're trying to, we've got businesses who are collecting commercial debt and they're constantly out trying to find new contracts. When they go to that new contract, they have to be able to say, we will convert a percentage of this debt.
Yeah.
They're buying the debt book at that. The more capability they have to prove their success, to show how they're able to convert that debt. And they don't necessarily have to show the economical saving, because that's their margin. They have to be able to show to that business they can collect a proportion of that debt that is sufficient to say, I'm going to trust you, here, take the book, go and get that debt back.
Yeah.
So the technology and those processes and the proof of it doing its job enables them to win and secure new business and more business and be competitive in the market. Obviously everybody follows. You set a bar and you lead the way, everybody follows you. If it works, people are always chasing you. So that's why we've had to try and stay ahead and come out, what's extra, what's next, what else can we do, how can we be different, how can we be better? We want our customers to have an edge over anybody who buys our competitors' products. So, we're constantly battling to make sure they can battle as well.
I completely agree. Thank you. Is there a benchmark you think organisations should be aiming for, or can it vary? I think we kind of touched on that a little bit just then.
Yeah, it does vary. There's no question. From you owe me something, give it me, and you don't want to, that they realistically should be looking to automate around 85% of their activity. There's no way that you'll do 100%. People want to. People have tried, but it's just not practical.
Yeah.
Humans are humans. If I'm paying, there are people who don't want to pay you the debt unless they've had a chance to vent at you. I want to tell you how this is dreadful. I'm going to tell you should never have given me this. I'm going to tell you how hard life is. Okay, I'm happy now, I'll pay you.
Do you think that aspect of it is generational as well? Or
it's just awkward people like me want to moan before I pay. I classify myself as one of them. I invariably want to challenge them. I want to see if I can reduce it. I want to see why I should be doing it. And I want to vent. And there's the people who just don't trust technology. They want to speak to a human. They might need some advice. So I think no matter no matter how hard you try, you need to make sure you're covering all of your demographic and all of their use cases. Some people want to talk, some people don't.
Yes, yeah.
You know, there's a bigger proportion that want that anonymity.
Yeah.
You know, and self-service and well-designed systems that fill the references in themselves and help you confirm the DPA themselves and already tell you what the balance is and let you set up a payment plan so I don't have to speak to somebody, because, you know, debt can be embarrassing. It's an awkward thing to be in.
Some people already understand kind of where they're at and what they need to do, whereas others might want to discuss their options and, like you said, get more into it and argue their case a little bit more.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And you know, with the website, I mean, you'd think it was an age thing, but I think there are people who just like interacting in that manner.
Yeah.
I don't think maybe it was age related 10, 15 years ago, but you know, the 50-year-olds now,
there's a lot more familiarity around it.
You know, I'm classed as old. I'm 54. I'm that older demographic. You know, and computers were coming in when I was at senior school. You know, so it's normal. You know, I've done my whole working life on a computer, so digitalization and digital is normal for me. I think if you're in a job perhaps that's not, you know, digitally related, maybe it's different, but it's certainly not. I don't really see it as an age thing. There's as many cool, digitally knowledgeable old people as there are young people.
Of course there is, absolutely. We've got one final question.
Okay.
What is the number one key takeaway you think listeners and viewers should take from this session?
I think is make sure you understand the value of what you're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, if you aren't clear on the return on your investment, if you don't know the cost of what you're doing today, you shouldn't be looking at things. It's very dangerous. If you go out looking and you find a product and you don't understand why you really need that product and what the cost of not having it is, it makes it very difficult to buy. You know, we have too many customers that, you know, you tell them that you go through a product and the cost of that purchase, and I don't think they've really considered what the costs are of what they do today. And it's a mistake a lot of businesses make. If you don't know your cost of everything you do, it's very difficult to make an investment to move forward to improve that. We know, you know, we know the cost of a meeting. We know the cost of everything we do, because you've got to respect that value of what you're getting for your money. You need to know what you're spending.
Because there's not just a value in processes, there's a value in people.
Yeah, so a whole rounded thing. So be aware of your today's costs before you look at new. That would be my takeaway. Make sure you understand what the cost of business truly is before you look to save money.
I think that's a perfect way to round off the podcast.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
That's right, you're welcome.
If anyone has any questions for Mark or is interested in automating the payment processes within your business, you can contact Key IVR using the details on screen by email or telephone, or they will be provided in the description of the podcast. And for any future podcasts, you can find them on YouTube, Spotify, and LinkedIn. And we look forward to seeing you in the future. Thank you, everybody.